college freshman found dead in her dorm, no forced entry, no screams, and a pencil shoved deep into her throat. Who would do this? And why did she let them in? She was supposed to be at the hospital by noon. Danielle Davis, just 19, had promised her mother she'd arrive early, sit by her bedside, and hold her hand before the heart surgery. It was a simple promise, one she never broke. But by 1 p.m., she was missing. Calls went unanswered. Messages stopped. Within hours, a quiet dormitory room on the second floor of Ogeechee Technical College in Statesboro, Georgia, would become the center of a crime scene. Inside, the room bore signs of a violent interruption. Pillows torn from the bed, a desk lamp on the floor, personal items strewn in deliberate chaos. Her body was found near the bed, partially obscured by a pile of clothes and a canvas bag, as if someone had tried to cover her in haste or shame. The body was sprawled in unnatural angles. There were no defensive wounds on the fists, no signs of restraint. But what stood out, what horrified even seasoned investigators, was the object forced into her throat. A mechanical pencil, bent unnaturally, wedged deep enough to block airflow. Her mouth was open, her eyes wide, frozen in terror. The ligature marks around her neck were precise, indicating strong, sustained pressure. Not a struggle, a choice, a deliberate act. The bruising suggested she was conscious when it began, and unconscious, or dead, by the time the object was inserted. The room didn't smell of blood. It smelled of plastic, laundry detergent, and something faintly metallic. Cold, antiseptic, quiet. The forensic team concluded that she died from asphyxiation due to external compression of the neck. But the pencil changed the context. This wasn't just murder. It was a message. Inserting an object post-mortem, particularly one so small, so personal, often reflects the killer's attempt to assert control, humiliation, or a twisted signature. A mark left not for the victim, but for those who would find her. There was no sign of forced entry. No window was breached. The door had been locked from the inside, suggesting the killer either had a key, was let in, or left before it was relocked, possibly staged. Nothing valuable was stolen. No sexual assault occurred. The motive wasn't material. It was personal. Danielle had only been on campus for 3 months. She was well-liked, academically driven, and socially active. Her peers described her as cheerful, ambitious, the kind of presence people noticed in a hallway. She had no known enemies, no history of substance abuse. Her schedule was clean, her routine predictable. The last people known to see her alive were 3 male acquaintances, Gerard Cook, Kurt Hines, and Darrell Priestley. All 3 claimed they had visited her dorm the previous evening, watched television, and left before 10:30 p.m. Surveillance footage partially supported their timeline. But what concerned investigators was the lack of continuity in Darrell's story. His account changed with each retelling. He first claimed to have gone to the library after leaving Danielle's room, but there was no sign of him entering. When confronted with the building's surveillance records, he adjusted the story, saying he had forgotten a USB drive and turned back. Later, his phone records revealed 2 calls received from Danielle's number shortly after 10:30 p.m. He hadn't mentioned that. This raised new questions. Had he returned to the dorm? If so, why? And what exactly happened in those final 30 minutes? From a behavioral standpoint, the crime was not impulsive. While not necessarily premeditated, it carried hallmarks of an emotional escalation. A confrontation turned deadly. The use of the pencil, placed post-mortem, was symbolic. It required time, intent, This act, seemingly minor, transformed the murder from a panic-driven accident into a personalized display of power. The killer didn't just want her dead. He wanted her silenced. No fingerprints were found on the pencil, but traces of skin cells were. Lab analysis matched the DNA to Darrell Priestley. The pathology of such killers often reveals patterns of emotional suppression and obsessive fixation. Darrell had no romantic relationship with Danielle, but he may have felt entitled to one. She represented something: admiration, success, freedom, that he could not access. Her rejection, even if silent or imagined, was likely internalized as humiliation. When such psychological tension reaches a tipping point and the opportunity aligns, violence erupts. The setting was controlled. The door was closed. And in that silence, someone decided to end a life, not in chaos, but in control. Danielle's body was removed under a gray sky. The campus fell still. For days, her room remained sealed. Inside, a mechanical pencil lay bagged in evidence. Outside, students stopped walking past that hallway. They took different routes, spoke in hushed tones, because what happened behind that door could no longer be explained by logic, only by darkness. Before we continue, make sure to like and subscribe. It really helps us a lot. Thank you. In the days following Danielle's death, her dorm became more than just a crime scene. It became a symbol. Students gathered outside her door, not out of curiosity, but reverence. Some left candles. Others whispered prayers. The hallway that once echoed with laughter now felt hollow, as if the walls themselves were grieving. But beneath that quiet grief, questions churned. The investigation turned inward, focusing not on strangers, but on those within Danielle's circle. Suspicion rarely begins with enemies. It begins with those who were close enough to be trusted. And Darrell Priestley was quickly becoming more than just a person of interest. He had visited Danielle's dorm with two other friends, Gerard and Kurt, that evening. All three gave statements. All three said they left before nightfall. Gerard and Kurt recounted the night with a sense of stunned sadness. But Darrell was different. His demeanor detached. His eyes evasive. His words inconsistent. When questioned about the calls from Danielle's phone after 10:30 p.m., Darrell paused. He didn't deny the calls, but he couldn't explain them. Said he might have left something behind, maybe his phone. He claimed he went back to retrieve it. That would mean he returned to the dorm after the others had left. Alone, with Danielle. Forensic analysis later confirmed that the second call from Danielle's phone to Darrell's was placed at 11:03 p.m. She was still alive, but barely an hour later, she was dead. This timeline broke the case open. Investigators revisited Darrell's movements. Phone pings placed him near the dorm around 11:15 p.m., exactly when the medical examiner estimated Danielle's time of death. He had not returned to the library, as previously stated. No other alibi held. The lie had collapsed. There was no sign of forced entry. Danielle had likely let him in, trusted him. It was a tragic miscalculation. Inside the room, the struggle hadn't lasted long. Based on the position of the body and the disruption of nearby objects, the confrontation began close to the bed. There were no cries for help. No neighbors reported unusual noise, which meant she was silenced quickly. The bruises on her neck told that story. Clean, even pressure, applied with both hands. Not sudden, but sustained, deliberate. Danielle fought, but she never stood a chance. She was smaller, lighter, and she never expected someone she knew to turn violent. As Darrell's involvement became clearer, investigators began examining not just what he did that night, but why. His history revealed a pattern of emotional withdrawal. Teachers once described him as polite, quiet, yet easily agitated when challenged. Friends said he had trouble handling rejection. He wasn't violent, but he held grudges. In criminal psychology, this profile fits the inward rage model, a person who experiences perceived slights as personal attacks, even when none are intended. Over time, that resentment builds. It waits. And when the object of that fixation, someone like Danielle, asserts independence, sets boundaries, or simply doesn't reciprocate interest, the built-up resentment can erupt into violence. The pencil was not chosen at random. It was hers, something ordinary, intimate. For Darryl, it may have represented control or defilement, or simply the last item within reach. But its placement after death was no accident. It symbolized something. In some cases, killers perform post-mortem insertions to symbolically silence the victim, especially in crimes driven by emotion. They don't want the victim to speak, not just in life, but in memory. It is an act of dominance. It is deeply personal. When Darryl was finally brought in for DNA collection, he did not resist. He remained calm, too calm, the kind of calm that investigators have learned to fear. Sometimes, those who show the least emotion are the ones who've rehearsed their story the longest. But the evidence didn't lie. His skin cells were found on the pencil. His phone data placed him at the scene. His inconsistencies had become contradictions. And now, his silence said more than any confession. By the time the warrant was signed for his arrest, the community had already drawn its own conclusions. The story had traveled fast. The students knew. The staff whispered. Parents called the college demanding answers, because no one could understand how a crime so cold, so quiet, had come from someone so ordinary. But in truth, it is the ordinary that hides the most dangerous minds. Those who say little, those who wait, those who feel overlooked. In cases like these, the killer isn't the monster in the dark. He's the one standing next to you in the light, quiet, watching, waiting for a reason. And in that dorm room, behind a locked door, he found it. The arrest of Darryl Priestley came with no resistance, no emotional outburst, no plea for understanding. He stood motionless as cuffs closed around his wrists, as if he had rehearsed that moment just as carefully as every lie that came before it. He didn't ask what he was being charged with. He didn't need to. Everyone already knew. The case moved quickly through the legal system, not because it was simple, but because it was sealed with precision. Physical evidence, digital timelines, DNA, motive, opportunity. It was a textbook example of modern forensic alignment. But what the evidence could not fully explain, what no file or chart could reveal, was the darkness that led Darryl to that moment. Court documents painted a picture of emotional instability layered beneath a socially acceptable exterior. Academic records, psychiatric assessments, journal entries, all pointing to a young man who felt invisible, overlooked, and powerless. Danielle had never humiliated him, never mocked or rejected him publicly. But in his mind, she didn't have to. Her indifference was offense enough. In psychology, this is known as narcissistic injury, a perceived slight that shatters the fragile ego of someone who believes they are owed affection, attention, or validation. Danielle's crime, to Darryl, wasn't rejection. It was simply being beyond his reach. She became the symbol of everything he couldn't control. That loss of control drove the act itself. Not with a weapon he brought, but with what was already there. A pencil, a hand, a door that she opened herself. This wasn't premeditated in the traditional sense. There was no plan, no weapon cache, no written intent. But there was readiness, the kind that simmers quietly for weeks, months, sometimes years, until the right moment opens and the wrong person walks through it. In the courtroom, the prosecution didn't need theatrics. The facts were enough. Medical examiners described the lack of hesitation marks, the deliberate nature of the pressure on her neck, the angle of insertion, the absence of panic in the aftermath. Danielle hadn't just been murdered, she had been silenced, both physically and symbolically. As the evidence unfolded, Darryl sat motionless. No eye contact, no visible emotion. The jury watched him as much as they watched the screens, and in the silence of the gallery, the photographs of Danielle's body spoke louder than any testimony. The verdict came swiftly: guilty of murder in the first degree. The sentencing followed: life without parole. But even in justice, the questions lingered. Could this have been prevented? Had anyone seen the signs? Would it have changed anything if Danielle had simply said no more clearly, or never spoken to him at all? The tragedy of cases like these isn't just in the loss of life. It's in the illusion of safety that vanishes afterward. In the realization that danger doesn't always wear a mask or break down doors. Sometimes it waits quietly, sits across the table, shares a conversation, and smiles. Then, when no one is watching, it strikes. Danielle's murder was not just a crime, it was a rupture. A reminder that control, when left unchecked in fragile hands, becomes obsession. That silence, when used as punishment, becomes cruelty. And that violence doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. After the trial, Danielle's dorm room remained vacant. The college eventually converted the space into a counseling office. Some said it was fitting. Others couldn't walk past without remembering. Her family never returned to the campus. Her mother, still recovering from the heart surgery Danielle never made it to, kept her daughter's photo on the nightstand. She stopped answering questions about the case. Not because she didn't care, but because no answer could make sense of what had been taken. The mechanical pencil was never returned. It remained in an evidence locker, sealed in plastic, its purpose changed forever. Once a tool for notes and exams, now a symbol of silence, obsession, and control. And though the courtroom had closed and the cameras were gone, the story didn't end there. It continued in every quiet hallway, every overlooked conversation, every moment when someone's pain goes unnoticed until it's too late. Because behind every locked door, there's always the question, who has the key and what are they carrying inside?